Welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast, where we sit down and have real conversations with business leaders that have been where you are. During these interviews, we'll dive into what it takes to improve systems and champion processes that maximize performance. Each week, our trailblazing guests share their experiences and understanding of the workforce to help inspire change, challenge our thinking, and share what it takes to successfully travel the road to profitability. Now here's our host, co-founder and chief evangelist of About Time and WorkMax, Mike Merrill.
Hello and welcome to the Mobile Workforce Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Merrill, and today we are sitting down with Jen Silver. Jen is the president of Roofing Utah, Inc., a complete roofing operation in Utah, and the co-founder of Women-Owned Businesses of Northern Utah, who are fierce advocates of Utah women business owners. Today, we're recording episode number 1 of 2 of the conversations that we're going to have with Jen. So we're really excited about it. And initially here, we're going to talk about the impact of your business model and what it has to offer uniquely to the industry. Also, we want to talk about how to evaluate your business model and how to make adjustments once you've made that evaluation. Hello, Jen. Thank you for joining us today. Excited to have the conversation.
Hi, Mike. How are you doing? I appreciate you guys having me. I think it's definitely going to be something that will be worthwhile for all the listeners.
Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to it. Well, you're just my neighbor to the north, just a little bit. What, maybe an hour or hour and a half or something?
You're in Arizona?
No, I am in Payson, Utah.
Oh, I did not know that you were in Payson. So I live in Roy, which is about an hour and a half, but my office is in South Salt Lake. So that's a little bit closer.
Well, me too. So it's nice to meet my neighbor that I didn't know before.
Yeah, well, it's nice to meet you as well.
Thanks. Well, so let's start the conversation today and talk a little bit about when you hear the term or say the term business model, what does that exactly mean to you?
I think your business model is ultimately the way you do business. You know, it includes your sales cycle, it includes your company culture, it includes your mission, your vision, down to your profitability. I think there's a lot of different things that go into the term business model, but to sum it up, I believe it's just the way that you choose to do business.
Okay, and that's an interesting perception, because I think in a lot of industries, people just do business the way that they maybe in their career, they're used to doing business that way because somebody else they work for did it that way. And so they just perpetuate whatever that was, or maybe their dad or their uncle or somebody that they know started the business initially, and they just keep on taking that train down the track. So what's the danger of not really taking a hard pause and looking at this a little bit more introspectively?
Well, I think the reason that a lot of people are business owners or entrepreneurs, whichever word you want to use, is because it gives you the freedom to create something that you believe in. And I find business owners lose their passion a lot of times around what they're doing when the business model isn't something that they necessarily did create, or they don't implement the changes that they see from a visionary standpoint because it's the way it's always been done, or, change seems like it's going to be hard, or, they're worried about the outside perception of other people in the industry should they choose to shift their model into something different.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. So I know in the intro, I talked a little bit about you're in the roofing trades, specialty construction. I know insurance is a big piece of that industry and has a big impact on how things operate there. What can you share with us about insurance and maybe some of the challenges that can introduce into just a normal competitive environment?
When I came into roofing, I had business knowledge, but not necessarily a lot of roofing experience. But I did have, a substantial amount of business experience. And as I was observing, working for the company that I worked for prior to owning my own company, there was a lot of parts that just didn't make sense to me. And especially when it came to doing insurance related work. Why did an outside entity get to dictate the way my business model ran and my profitability and what software I had to have and what types of employees I had to have just to be able to do a certain type of work that was still ultimately producing a roof. Why did that have to be so different? And ultimately, why did I not get to have control over it? So when I started my own roofing company, I made a decision that I was not going to follow the status quo. I was not going to do business with insurance companies the way other people had always done it. I was not going to use an insurance proceeds model, which is the guys that say, hey, we'll do your roof for whatever the insurance company gives us. The only thing that you'll be out of pocket is the deductible, right? That's what the insurance proceeds model is. But what I realized is in that model, people are trying to collect from an entity, AKA the insurance companies, and they have no contract with the insurance companies. The carriers have no legal obligation to ever pay the contractor, right? And the homeowner's off the hook. They have no skin in the game because they're doing it for the proceeds of the carrier anyways. So the homeowner kind of gets lost in the shuffle. They get drug into the middle of an argument between two people where one holds the power because of the model that the other chose to use because they think it's easier. So I just said, no, not doing this. I am going to run my business the way that I envision my business, and we are going to operate around our core values, which are contribution and customer service. And that's what I'm going to stick to. And I'm going to do retail work all the time. And if a homeowner needs us to support them in their claim process by giving them documentation around the roofing job that was completed, 150%, we will do that. But we don't talk to insurance companies. I don't negotiate my pricing, and I don't get involved in the claim process at all.
Interesting. I like that. It sounds fantastic. Obviously, that didn't come about on its own. You had to draw some pretty hard lines, I'm sure, and have been through some interesting experiences getting to a point where you can feel confident in making those types of statements. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it was probably easier than you would think, to be honest. We were just very transparent with the customers that would come in and explain to them pretty much exactly what I just said is I can't collect from your carrier. I'm not in contract with your carrier. Your carrier is in contract with you. You have the power with the claim. I can support you as your contractor by giving you the information that they need around your roofing project. But, there's laws that keep me from being able to talk to your carrier, talk about your policy, talk about scope. And frankly, I'm not going to cross any of those lines. I am just going to stay in my lane. And more people understood that than didn't. And what I finance my homeowners so that they have the ability to wait to get the money back from their carriers, and it gives them freedom, right? They get the money on their roof, and roofs are not cheap. So, having the ability to choose what they want to do with $10, $15, $20,000, that can help a lot of homeowners in a lot of ways that I think we don't even realize. So it's been a really easy transition, to be honest. We had a little bit of bumps at the beginning, but it didn't last very long. And our consumers are happy, and the insurance companies are happy, and I'm happy because I run my business the way I want to run my business.
Yeah, that sounds great. That's interesting. I think most of the listeners have been through, maybe some automobile damage, and that they were dealing with an insurance carrier or their windshield, and it's like, hey, we'll fix your windshield, or we'll fix the dents in your vehicle and your bumper for the price of your deductible, so to speak. And I think sounds like a similar situation to what's going on in the roofing industry as far as insurance carriers. Is that right?
It is. And, unfortunately, I think that model leaves consumers more vulnerable for fraud. It leaves consumers more vulnerable to be taken advantage of. It leaves, roofers more vulnerable to be going out of business, and it leaves them more vulnerable to commit fraud out of desperation, of not getting an accounts receivable, having an accounts receivable that is so far out, not being able to collect on your accounts receivables. And, a lot of my drive in switching my business model was around, I was tired of being looked at as somebody who was a storm chaser, or somebody that was going to run off with their money or going to go out of business because of the insurance proceeds model and the sensationalism that we see in the media around those types of contractors.
That is fascinating. I think everybody has seen Storm Chasers or some type of television show where you get this vision of, oh, this is what this is actually like for these people. So you probably get categorized because of that.
Yes. Yep, I did.
So where do you think the industry went wrong, and how did this all come about where this was actually the challenge? And it sounds like it still is a big challenge going on today.
So there's a program called Xactimate. And Xactimate was originally designed for the carriers to be able to have some type of a way to estimate what the cost, labor and material wise, of a roof should be, what's a reasonable cost, what's a median cost. And about, from what I understand, 15 or 20 years ago, contractors started to use Xactimate as well, like that it was like a common language that they could use to communicate on a claim. And it went fine for quite a long time. They could sit down and work it out. And then probably in about 2015, 2016, some contractors became more educated on the software and started to, I don't want to say manipulate the software because I don't know that they manipulated it, but they worried more about maximizing the amount of money that they could get out of a carrier rather than staying focused on what was reasonable and a reasonable profit to be able to complete the job. And, conferences arose out of that, things like Win the Storm, where they're primarily teaching contractors how to make as much money as you possibly can as quickly as you can, right? And, adversarially, then carriers started to, be frustrated, and they created a lot of conflict, and they started leaving things off of their estimate, and it just became a mess, so to speak, where people fought and argued, and sometimes consumers are stuck in the middle, and it's 6 months and their roof still isn't on because their roofer and their carrier can't seem to agree on a price. And meanwhile, the homeowner's going, what's going on? And it's, instead of looking at it from a reasonable standpoint and an equitable standpoint, we got to a place where we wanted to be right and we wanted to win instead of doing what's right and allowing the homeowner to win.
Wow. Yeah. Sounds very challenging. And I can imagine with an insurance carrier in the middle that's holding the keys to the purse string, so to speak, or the one that's actually funding this ultimately, because of the proceeds that they're paid monthly in the premium payments of the customer, they're kind of in the driver's seat.
Well, in the insurance proceeds model, they are. Now, in a retail model, they're not. The consumer is, and that's who should be in charge of their claim, is the consumer. And the consumer should be in communication with their contractor, and the consumer should be in communication with their carrier. And the relationship the consumer and their carrier have is between them. And what they work out and what their policy states or how their indemnification works, again, that's between the consumer and their carrier. The contractors need to stay focused on putting on a good quality roof that follows guideline or manufacturer specifications, IRC guidelines and codes, and that they're going to stay in business and be there in case the consumer has any challenges with their roof in the future, and not be insurance experts.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. My wife actually works at a ortho surgeon's office, and she deals with insurance all the time. And that's the same thing that they run into. At some point, the ortho surgeon's hands are tied, regardless of what the coverage is or isn't. Somebody's got a challenge that they need fixed immediately, in their mouth. And so ultimately they have to do the same thing. They work it out with the client, and then the client goes and communicates with the insurance company to make sure that they get reimbursed for the procedure that was necessary. And
reimbursement is a much more powerful way to go about it than to try to negotiate and get agreement up front. So when I get an estimate, I just look at, is it 100% approved? Is it a full roof or is it not? Because if it's a full roof, whatever the carrier has written down doesn't change the way I put the roof on. right? They're not roofing experts. They're going to leave some stuff off. That's okay. I'm going to make sure as a roofing contractor that everything is done the right way, and the homeowner pays for it, because we offer the financing, and then they go back to their carrier and say, look, it was a full roof. Nothing on here is not reasonable and necessary. I've incurred all of the costs associated with it. Here's my paid invoice. Please reimburse me. And that's a much simpler process than the former.
Yeah, the customer to vendor relationship should be a lot more powerful than a vendor to vendor relationship with the customer in the middle, is what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the insurance carriers don't necessarily care what happens to my business, but they do care about their customer, right? They want to make sure that their customer stays their customer. And that's the right thing to do.
Well, it sounds fantastic. I hope that the listeners are plugging into this, that those especially that have the opportunity. And I know, like you mentioned, in roofing, it's restoration, certainly industries that deal with insurance every day and is a big piece of their business.
Yes.
So tell me this, from your perspective, how do you think that somebody can go about evaluating their business and looking at that model, whatever it is? Maybe this doesn't fit one-to-one with all the listeners, but what are some pointers or things that companies should be looking for in making improvements in their overall business model and approach?
So I think there's a few things that are triggers or things that you can be aware of that might say, hey, do I need to look at my model? One, what is everybody else around me doing? Like if they're doing something completely different or the industry around me has evolved and I haven't, then I probably need to look at that. Are my employees leaving? What's my attrition rate? Because if your culture is not working, then there's probably something going on inside of your model or your processes and your procedures that needs to have, some tweaking done to it. And if you're not profitable anymore, if your sales are down, all of those things would be indicators to me that there's something missing somewhere. The other thing I think is just passion by an owner. If you've lost your passion in your business and it no longer, feeds that part of you, look at that. What part of your business have you lost passion about? And how can you switch some of those things around to regenerate passion? Because if you lose it, it's gone for the team.
That's a great point. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that statement. So do you recommend hiring an outside source? Are you thinking of other peers? I mean, what approaches would you take in getting that outside set of eyes?
Well, I think that there's probably a few different ways depending on what you're looking at. I think if it's a process and procedure type of situation, an EOS implementer is always a good solution. EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System, for anybody that hasn't heard that term before. But that's a great place to start, especially when you're looking at breaking things down and kind of going backwards, and how are you going to take your business to the next level and make sure that you can sustain growth. Culture is another big thing. Doing employee surveys, anonymous employee surveys, I think can be something that will give you some good feedback from your team on what's missing or where their job satisfaction is going. Exit interviews are crucial. Find out why people are leaving. And, being honest and being willing to adapt and being a leader that listens to their team and listens to their people and listens to their customers. Customer surveys, I think, are another really good read, on after the sale is complete, or if they chose to go with another option, why did they choose that option? And when a sale is complete, why did they choose you and what could you have done better? And I think you can identify a lot of those things with those options without even having to spend a lot of money.
Yeah, I think you hit on a few key things there. I think one of the things that's going through my mind is, the book you probably read, a lot of people have, Who Moved My Cheese? And it seems like all of us need, almost as a matter of practice, need to have that cheese moved every so often. even if things are moving smoothly and things are clipping along, is there a time frame, or what are some triggers that you think are important for somebody to say, maybe it's time to take a look at this again and maybe rework a little bit of our business approach?
So I do business planning every fall for the next year, where I do budgeting, growth, what I'm looking to accomplish over the next year. And I think that that's probably when I focus on it. Now, if I've had a breakdown at some point, like I lost a reasonable amount of my team all at once this year due to me being on the road and some other things that were going on. So that was a trigger, obviously, that something was not working. And I needed to look at that and evaluate that. But if there isn't a substantial trigger, I think that you can do it annually and get enough feedback based on your numbers and evaluating your customer surveys and evaluating the things that were said in exit interviews, and make some decisions on the next year and how you're going to execute and what things you're going to change.
Yeah, I really like that approach. Your answer is different than I expected, which I'm happy to hear you explain it that way. Annually, I mean, we all have annual goals, whether it's revenue or production or overall growth, whatever the metric is. It makes perfect sense that this would be an area of focus every year when you get ready to start the new year.
Organizational change can be challenging. And if you do too much change all the time, it creates instability. So doing it constantly, I think, is not a good solution. Even quarterly, I think, is too much. But if it's annually and you're rolling out everything every January, and your team has an expectation that you're going to come back with new goals and new numbers and new options, I think that if you do it too much, but you have that culture where your team knows in January that there's going to be some new initiatives and some new goals, and you're communicating that with your team, and that's already the way that you've established things to be done, then the change is a lot easier, right? Because it's expected and it's exciting. But I think you have to be responsible for how often you implement change.
Well, if I'm reading between the lines, what I'm hearing you say is we don't make changes for the sake of change itself, but we're looking for improvement, measured, and although consistent, not so often that change is the only thing happening.
Right. No, absolutely.
So with the changes that you've made within your business, how long do you feel like it took to get your footing back under you and feel like you're back to moving forward again where you want to be?
I think that you can implement a good change pretty quickly when there's buy-in from your team. If you do not have the buy-in from the people around you and you don't have a clear process on how you're going to implement change, it can be really hard. I think they say it takes 30 days to establish a habit. So, it's a lot of consistency on the front side. It's a lot of reminders. It's a lot of support. Not a lot of scolding, not a lot of negativity. Just, hey, we said we do it this way. What can I do to support you? Do we need to put reminders up? What things can we do to help make this easier on everybody as a team and as a unit in general? So I think that it really, really has to do with the consistency on the front end. If you're not consistent, it's not going to happen. And if you're not consistent the very first time you try to implement change, the next time you try to do it, your team isn't going to trust you. And they're not going to take the change seriously. And so as a leader, there's a lot of responsibility on you to make sure that those first 30 days you are present, involved, supportive, and you can usually kind of let up after 30 days if you've been consistent for that long.
Yeah, I like a lot of what you said there too. And what I'm hearing also is that there are different types of changes. Some of them are external, like the insurance example, where it's a business model change in how you're billing or you're executing on contracts or estimating, et cetera. And then there's other changes which are more internal and directly impact your staff and their personal life. So how do you prioritize which changes to make when, and put those in proper order so that you don't lose buy-in?
Well, I think you need to make a decision on what the big goal is of that year, right? And what changes are necessary for you to be able to reach those goals. You know, when you ask most employees what the goal is of their company, I would say 80 to 90% have no idea what their company's goals are. And that becomes a huge missing in an organizational culture. But when everybody is aware, if you have a kickoff meeting every January and you're talking about the goals, and then it's like, okay, in order to make these goals, because this is a stretch for us, these are the couple things that we're going to have to change internally in order to do that. That's a completely different conversation. So I think it's important to stay focused on what the end result is and not necessarily focus on the reason of the change or what was broken before, or it's not bad or wrong. It's just, this is what we need to do to make this happen.
So a positive focus on what can be actually done physically or with intention,
yes,
to work towards that goal.
So one thing like right now that I see in a lot of businesses that I cannot figure out why they haven't changed is when you go into a business and they say, well, if you pay with a credit card, I'm going to charge you 3%, right? That drives me absolutely insane as a business owner, because I think, okay, that is a service that you provide. Raise your prices 3% all across the board. Nobody's going to notice the 3% increase in your price. And now you don't have to say that anymore. And you don't have to have people think, okay, why am I I'm already giving you money. I'm already paying for something. And now you're wanting me to pay more because I pay with a credit card, when 90% of people are paying with debit or credit cards. Very few people carry cash. So just increase your pricing, adapt. Increase your pricing and adapt to the way that consumers buy, instead of making it a burden that consumers buy that way. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah.
That's one example that I see constantly when I'm out shopping and doing various things, that I think, why won't you just increase your pricing? Just switch your model around, change it up a little bit, but don't make the consumer think that they're paying to use their card.
Well, and one other approach that comes to mind is, raise your prices 3% or whatever, and then give a discount if they want to pay with cash or a check.
Yeah, that is definitely an option, and it makes it much easier, and it benefits those that aren't paying with cards. But at the same time, those that are, you're covered, and it's not they're not an inconvenience.
Yeah, I like that. It's a positive leaning approach that says we're actually going to do something extra for you if you'll do this for us, as opposed to you're all punished.
Right. Yes, I agree.
Awesome. So this has been a great and very enlightening conversation. I know that the listeners will find it valuable. As far as this part of the conversation goes, what's the one takeaway that you hope people have when they are done listening to this?
I think the biggest thing is to remember that change is inevitable. There is no way to ever avoid change. But in business, it's necessary. So not only is it inevitable, but it's necessary. And things will change around you, and you will either become, an artifact, so to speak, or do things in a way that consumers won't be attracted to you due to convenience or modernization or whatever it is, or your well will go dry. And if you don't dig a new well and figure out a new way to do things, you probably aren't going to stay in business.
Great takeaway. Yeah, I think that's powerful. So again, thank you. And I do have a couple personal questions to wrap up on, if you're okay with that.
Of course.
Awesome. So the first thing is, what's something that you're just super grateful for in your professional life?
So I am a person of faith, and I know that some people use the word God and some people use the word the universe, and whichever word applies to you is completely fine. But for me, it's God, and I am incredibly grateful because I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing in life right now. I'm supposed to be out teaching contractors that there are another way and not to fear change and that it's okay. Because the people that I find that are coming into my life professionally to support me are on the same mission. And the path is unfolding easily. And the ears that are willing to listen are far more than anybody probably would have ever anticipated going into an industry that's operated the same way for so long. So that's probably what I am the most grateful for, are just the people and the resources and the support that I've had, because I know that I'm doing the work that I'm supposed to be doing.
Oh, that's beautiful. Sounds like you've got your why figured out, which a lot of us are always working through that still. So congratulations on that.
Well, that's not exactly my why, but I do appreciate it. It is a step to my why, but yes. Yeah, so my long-term goal is to transform high school education. And I want to take high school history to a 2-year requirement, 1 year government and econ, 1 year US and world. And I think that high school's job is to give people the knowledge that they need to be able to function in life, right? College is there for more technical knowledge and other knowledge that you need for a specific career. And I think history is amazing. I love it, but I think it can be an elective after that, and that you can get enough to function as an adult in 2 years. And then I want 2 years of practical education, credit, taxes, mortgages, compounding interest. I want a quarter of life where the teacher gives them a scenario. My wife lost her job. She's pregnant. I lost my job. How do we deal with this? Our savings account just got hacked. All of the different things in life that happen as adults that kids are not prepared to deal with. And I want to go to Washington and lobby and get funding allocated to the states that choose to adopt it. So that is my why.
Wow. Do you have any more details on it? No, I'm just kidding. Wow. That's awesome. That's fantastic. Good for you.
Thanks.
I don't think that I don't think many people would argue with a lot of the points that you just shared. I think there's a lot more practical education that our children need.
But it goes into change, right? Like it's the same concept in the school system. Like people are like, well, why hasn't anybody done this before? And it's because nobody wants to go in and do the work to change it. Nobody wants to be the person that says, okay, how are we going to redo this curriculum, the same curriculum we've done forever? So you see it everywhere, not just in business. It's in all aspects of life.
Well, and it is bleeding into our industry because we're having a really hard time getting the youth of today, those coming out of college or even high school, that want to have anything to do with the trades. And so it's having a big impact on how we're doing construction today and the ability that we can.
Well, they're just ill-equipped in a lot of skills, unfortunately.
Great point. Well, we'll put a pin in that part of the conversation. So we'll have to record another episode and see if we can dig a little deeper into some of that. But to wrap up, Jen, what is Jen Silver's superpower?
People have asked me that before. What is one thing that if I could give a trait of mine to my children, what would I give them? And I think that my biggest superpower is my ability to speak to people's listenings. So I'm very good at adapting my communication style, my messaging, and what I need, how I need to communicate so that that person can hear me, that through the filters that they think through. So, and that varies from employee to employee. It varies from city to city when I'm speaking publicly. It varies from child to child at home, right? As a leader, I think our job is to understand who we're speaking to so that we speak to be heard and actually not just speak at people. And I think that that's probably one of my greatest skills in life.
Well, good for you. Well, you're doing great work and doing big things, and it sounds like you're almost just getting started. So congratulations on finding your path, I'll say, not just your why, but the path that you're on, right?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It was about time to grow up and figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, right?
It is about time.
Yes.
Again, appreciate having you on today. Had a lot of fun, learned some great things, and I think we've shared some really, really valuable information with our listeners, which is always the goal. So thanks for joining us and looking forward to having you on another episode.
Me as well. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us today on the Mobile Workforce Podcast, sponsored by About Time Technologies and WorkMax. If you liked the conversation we had today, or were able to learn anything new or helpful, please make sure to follow us on our WorkMax page on LinkedIn and on Instagram at WorkMax_. And subscribe to the show on iTunes or your preferred podcast platform so you will never miss another insightful episode. Also, if you enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating and review and share the show with your friends and colleagues. Your support means the world to us and will allow us to continue providing impactful information with others looking to improve their results in their business and, in turn, their life.